Going to get right to this. With one exception, Brother Ray, where are you? I appreciate you throwing me under the bus. Because I am that guy that's going to talk about all these details. I am a detail guy. Anybody that knows me very well knows that I am a facts person, and that's what I did. Gotten asked me to do this lesson, I do want to ask you something. You can raise your hand here. How many of you have ever heard of the Patriarchs of Constantinople before you saw the lectureship here? Yeah, maybe 5 of you. 6. No, not a lot of us. And I'll add myself to that. I'd heard of it, but that was about it. I didn't know much of it. And I did think, okay, why does God not like me? What did I do? But once I started studying for this, I was very glad that he did, because I love to learn, even if it's stuff that really means nothing. But this does mean something. But I love to learn, and I did learn an awful lot from this, and I hope that I'll be able to pass some of it along to you. I asked a few of the gentlemen a few minutes ago, if anybody had mentioned the word see during the lessons here, because it is an important thing to deal with here. I first, when I see the word see, I of course think of vision. That's what we think of. But see is a noun also. And it's defined as a place in which a cathedral or church stands. It's identified as the seat of authority of a bishop or an archbishop. And we'll use the word see quite a few times today. The see at Byzantium was at best a very common see with little value, or really no value, until Constantine renamed the city and determined it to be his new Rome. By the way, I got a lot to cover, and as the coach for Alabama basketball says, buckle up. I'll cover what I can. Officially, there were 171 bishops, archbishops, or patriarchs of Byzantium or Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, of course, who ruled who reigned between 38 and 1500 A.D. There were several who ruled more than once, usually after having been deposed or abdicating themselves, either voluntarily or otherwise. The above amount of even 171 is not necessarily accurate for at least these 3 reasons. There's no evidence, number one, that the Apostle Andrew or the Apostle John, as the Eastern Orthodox Church later claimed, that they ever even visited or even came close to Byzantium, or that Andrew had even left Jerusalem before 42 A.D., but they say that he started it in 38 A.D. There's no historical evidence whatsoever. Secondly, there was no bishop in Byzantium before Metropolis, because there was no see or no official see there until before the official renaming of Byzantium to Constantinople in 325 or so, also called New Rome. And then third, there is at least one whose very existence cannot even be validated. When I was told that I needed to preach this, I thought, there's one beautiful thing that I was taught here at NWFB-SBS was that you preach the truth, and you preach confidently on the truth. Well, it's hard to be confident on something where it's like hitting a moving target all throughout studying this history, because it's so hard to find 2 people that give the same facts. So I can't preach it, but I can tell it to you. I can give you the information that I have. The politics, the violence, the scheming, the other non-Christ-like behavior that so many of the bishops and the archbishops, the patriarchs, and or their supporters exhibited help us to understand just how far the peoples who claimed to be Christian had already gone, even by the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, and then following after that. Religious people had departed from the New Testament patterns so far, so quickly, it would make your head spin. The office of bishop in the New Testament was one that was of great responsibility and gravity, and it still is, or it should be. But under the Eastern Orthodox Church, at least in my studies, it shows how that it had quickly become a place of selfish honor and a place for personal gain. It was not about serving the Lord. It was not about serving the people. It was not about shepherding the flock. It was about, what can I get out of this? Or what if the emperor places me here, what can I do for him? That's what it was all about. Nothing about what it should have been for. But this all helps us better understand the wisdom of God, doesn't it? These studies, when we see how things have gone astray so far, it helps us to understand that, God was right. And another thing that Brother Pat brought out a while ago that I teach often is that common sense. You know, there's not much place for common sense and religion in today's world, is it? But it should be. God gave us a brain. He designed him after himself. And he gave us the ability to think, didn't he? Shouldn't we do that? Absolutely. We should think for ourselves, but we should use his word to develop those ideas and develop those thoughts we should have. But it helps us understand the wisdom of God that was revealed in Scripture, such as Titus chapter 1, verses 5 through 9, which talks about, of course, the plurality of bishops, but it also gives us the qualifications, if you will, or more like the characteristics that these men should have. It tells us that throughout the Bible that it shows us that we really, really need to go to the Scriptures for our authority. Because if we go with the traditions of men, we see what's happened with the Patriarchs of Constantinople. We saw what happened with the popes of Rome. We've seen through all of these studies how far we can go away from the truth if we don't stick with the truth. Throughout the research done for this lesson, it became quickly obvious to me that many of the dates and the titles and the facts concerning the following men and of certain events are uncertain at best. And there's various reasons for that. Information that was taken from sources connected to the Roman Catholic Church has quite a Roman Catholic slant to it. Those taken from the Orthodox sources have an Orthodox slant to them. And then other sources that were away from them had their own slant to them. You know, there's often, as often is the case, when there's at least two sides to everything, there's going to be two different explanations or two different stories. I'll give you an example of this, of real life. 3 weeks ago, I was able to visit Corregidor Island in the Philippines. It's a major vantage point for shipping for centuries in the Bay of Manila. And it was a site of a massive battle in World War II. Many people died. It's a very humbling place to go to. But when we got there off of the boat, and we get on these little trams to carry us around there, there's one tram specifically for the Japanese tourists. And I thought, well, that's kind of odd. Why would they be separate from the rest of us? Well, then I found out later on why. Because the Japanese have one version of what happened, and everybody else has another. And that just occurred to me as I was there. I think, yes, applies to this lesson, how you get different stories because it's, you know, my way of thinking versus your way of thinking. With these facts in mind, though, we're considering the Eastern Orthodox patriarchy, so we're going to try to stay more with them where we can, and that's what I tried to do, although it was difficult finding all the information I needed from those sources. Much of the general information here is gathered from the official websites of the Orthodox Church of America and the Ecumenical Patriarchate, and I've listed some of those in the book. I hope you have them. But 4 things I want you to consider throughout this study, and I think it's applicable to most that we've looked at as far as those strayings from the truth. Scriptural truth was not highly valued in the recorded history of the Eastern Orthodox Church. It had very little value, as a matter of fact. And that's not a shot at anybody. That's just from looking at the facts. Number 2, honor was certainly not a necessary qualification for a patriarch, but it should be for one who serves as a bishop, an elder, a presbyter, or a shepherd of the Lord's church. Pattern theology was made up as they went along. As we see in the papacy, it just changes as they go. There's nothing necessarily original about it. And then 4th, the restudying of biblical questions to arrive at non-biblical answers is definitely not a new concept. There's nothing wrong with looking at things, keeping our minds open and trying to find what's God's truth about something. But too often throughout history, men have and women have restudied something so that they could arrive at a truth. In other words, they would take something out of context to fit what they wanted to say. Well, let's get to the lesson itself. First section is the bishops of Byzantium, the apostolic era. And you might even say error here. From 33 to 100. First, and remember, these men, these are not necessarily facts. These are the facts as recorded by the Orthodox Church. Andrew the Apostle supposedly founded this see in AD 38. He was the first apostle, of course, called by Jesus in John chapter 1, verse 40, and having been a disciple of John the Baptizer before that, John 1, 35 and verse 37. He reportedly died by crucifixion in Patras, Greece, about AD 70, on a saltire, which is an X-shaped cross, bound to it instead of nailed. I just found that interesting. According to tradition, Andrew traveled extensively and is thought to have preached in places such as Achaia, Galatia, Cappadocia, Bithynia, and Scythia. You notice I didn't mention Byzantium there? The Eastern Orthodox Church, though, loosely holds that he was the founder of the church there at AD 38. Here's the interesting part. This legend first occurs, even with them, in a 9th century forgery. Imagine if we based our beliefs, where we thought the church began, on a forgery that happened 900 years after the fact, or 800 years after the fact. But that's the case here. It's not even widely accepted within the Eastern Orthodox Church, but it's definitely not accepted by anyone else. The founding of the Church of Byzantium being attributed to Andrew has no historical value or no evidence, and it should not be considered as truth. And I've got a parenthetical statement here that I really want to read. You can follow with it if you will. There's no need to show much in the way of details for those who presumably followed Andrew, at least into the early 4th century. Not until Metropolis is there any evidence that any of them ever served in the office of bishop, archbishop, or any other title, since there was possibly not even a congregation that was at Byzantium. With the exceptions of Stachys and Onesimus, only the names and supposed dates of service will be listed. As Kelly Ross, Ph.D., states it, although the list of bishops of Byzantium is given from the early days of the church, this was not a particularly important city at the time, and that's putting it mildly. And one wonders about its historicity even more than with the early bishops given for Rome. Stachys the Apostle, 38 to 54. Again, these are their dates. Traditionally is held that he was appointed by Andrew, the Apostle Andrew, to watch over the flock at Byzantium, and he may have been the Stachys mentioned by the Apostle Paul in Romans 16 and verse 9. May have been. Onesimus, we know who he is, if it is the same one, the slave of Philemon. He's traditionally recognized as this same one, and he served from 54 to 68. And then we will drop all the way down through the Ante-Nicene area, which begins at 100, going through 325. We'll go all the way to 306 before we get to someone who actually existed according to evidence. And I'm dead serious. Metropolis, it was said by Cobham in the Patriarchs of Constantinople to be the first real person in the traditionally stated succession of bishops in Byzantium. It's traditionally accepted that the Emperor Constantine either bestowed upon him the honorary title of Patriarch shortly before the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea in 325, or that he convinced the Council Fathers there in attendance to do so. The see at Constantinople was not even elevated to a patriarch until 381 by the Second Council of Constantinople. So he could not have been a patriarch if there was no patriarchate there. Metropolis is reported to have been too old and too ill to attend that council anyway, and sent Alexander in his place. Alexander was the first archbishop of Constantinople as the city was officially renamed in 330 A.D. He sanctioned, and this is important, he did sanction Arius, who was the originator of the Arian heresy, and later refused to readmit Arius to communion. The third section, the Nicene era from 325 to 381. Paul the First, also known as Paul the Confessor, was exiled. Now, this is more interesting things, just little tidbits to think about just how corrupt this system really was. He was exiled 3 times, and all by the order of the Emperor Constantius II, and was twice restored when Constantius was unaware. This is a result of civil war between the Arians, who were protected by Constantius, and of the Bishop of Rome, who understood and despised the heresy of Arianism. He was finally exiled to Armenia, where it was believed he was strangled to death with his own cloak by Arians, and date unknown. Eusebius of Nicomedia was a distant relative to the imperial family of Constantine the Great, and it was he who baptized Constantine the Great on May 22nd, 337, just before the death of the emperor. He was the bishop of Berytus, or modern-day Beirut, then on the See of Nicomedia, and was finally appointed by Constantius as bishop of Constantinople after the latter had deposed Paul I. And it seems to have been very influential, the acceptance of Arianism in the household of Constantine, and the first person who was contacted by Arius after his excommunication from Alexandria. Again, I'm sorry I'm reading a lot of this, but this is just facts, or supposed facts. Macedonius I was consecrated as bishop of the Church of St. Paul by the Arians as soon as Paul I had returned from his second exile and been reintroduced. And I'll stop right there for a second. Trying to put together when some served, when they were deposed, or when they left and then came back was very, 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 very difficult. Because some of these dates and these different times of service may have been recorded by 4 or 5 different sources, but 4 or 5 different sources would have had 4 or 5 different dates. So put them together was pretty difficult. Again, I appreciate the challenge there I gotten. Really. But he was consecrated as bishop of the church by St. Paul, or of St. Paul. Been deposed in 360 on the grounds of cruelty and anathematized in the Second Ecumenical Council of 381. Socrates Scholasticus in his Historia Ecclesiastica wrote, now this sounds like a really great man leading the church here. The exploits of Macedonius on behalf of Christianity consisted of murders, battles, incarcerations, and civil wars. Much like that Papa thing that Brother Ray talked about. Not very fatherly at all. He taught that the Holy Spirit was not a divine being, but instead was on the level of angels. Eudoxius of Antioch became bishop of Constantinople on January 2360. And on February 15th, he dedicated the Hagia Sophia, which was the great cathedral, a great church building there in Constantinople, the one that had been begun by Constantine the Great in 342. But he was a very influential Arian. Florentius is briefly mentioned in some histories of the Eastern Orthodox Church, but almost nothing is known of him except that he may have been connected to the Anomians, I think, which was an extreme Arian sect. Demophilus, 370 to 379, was elected by the Arians as bishop in 370. At the same time, Evagrius was elected and ordained by the Orthodox party. Evagrius and Eustathius, who had chosen and ordained Evagrius, were banished by the Emperor Valens. The reason I'm giving a lot of these and not skipping through this is just to see, again, the corruption and the way that the emperor and the heads of the churches, just how they flowed together and didn't flow together sometimes. It was amazing. The emperor was, of course, considered really the head of the church after Constantinople became New Rome, and Constantine made it that way. And that's where that non-separation of church and state became such an important and terrible thing. In 380, Theodosius was ascended the throne of Rome, and he offered Demophilus a confirmation to his see since his patriarchy had been unofficial, on the condition, now listen to this, if you do this for me, on the condition that he agreed to the Nicene Creed, but he refused. He had some scruples about it. Demophilus was immediately deposed, and he was ordered to give up his churches, although some historians still have him serving until 386. This gave the Orthodoxy, of course, the Eastern Orthodox Church, power again for the first time in 40 years. Maximus was elected in 379. Listen how long he served. To the office, through the antics of Coptic Pope Peter II of Alexandria. He was ordained during the night. Shouldn't things be a little more transparent? He was ordained during the night as Bishop of Constantinople in place of Gregory the theologian, and was consecrated in the cathedral while Gregory, whose patriarchy was not actually canonical, was ill. The man's sick. Let him heal. No, the man's sick. Let's put somebody in his place. He was forced the next morning from the cathedral, withdrew to Thessalonica, and began his appeal to be reinstated, which was finally and unanimously rejected at the Second Ecumenical Council of 381. Gregory the theologian, known as one of the Cappadocian Fathers or three holy hierarchs. Look that up. I didn't want to spend the time going to that, along with Basil the Great and Gregory of Nyssa. He did have a significant input or effect on Trinitarian theology, which led to the demise of Arianism in Constantinople. Third section of time, the Nicene area, 381 to 451. Here's a very interesting one. We'll throw some Bible in on this one because it needs to be. Nectarius, 381 to 397, was a surprise pick by Emperor Theodosius I, as Nectarius was at the time a catechumen. You ask, what's a catechumen? Someone who's still studying. Someone who's not even been baptized yet. The man was named to be the leader of the Eastern Orthodox Church before he was even baptized. I thought I'd seen some ridiculous things, but I studied that and I found out I really hadn't. So what does this tell us? In the qualifications of a bishop or an elder, what is one of them? That he not be a novice? This in itself gives us some insight to the state of the church at the time. And I dare say even to the state of the church at times now. He was then baptized, of course, before taking office, being clothed with the robes of a bishop, and became president of the Second Ecumenical Council, which in its third canon gave the Bishop of Constantinople his first rank, which put him right after Rome, being equal with all the other sees, if you will, like Jerusalem and Alexandria. He died in office in September 397 as the first true Patriarch of Constantinople. John the First, Chrysostom, was known as a prolific writer. He was second only to Augustine of Hippo in the quantity of surviving writings today. He tried to reform the pomp and circumstance of the church, which I find fascinating. You look already by not even 400 AD, it had gotten beyond simple Christianity, obviously, but even in the services or the doings of the church, it was pomp and circumstance. Does that remind you of any religious organizations today? That's one of the beautiful things about the Lord's church. One of the many beautiful things about the Lord's church is just simple Christianity, simple worship. It doesn't need to be, it shouldn't be, it doesn't have to be, and thank the good Lord, it is not anything else but just simple worship and simple Christianity. He revised many of the prayers and the rubrics of the divine liturgy. He wrote and spoke against the Judaizing teachers of the day. Yes, they were still around at that time. Chrysostom was actually added to his name after his death. It means golden mouth because of the eloquence of his speech. And I have heard some Chrysostoms already today, and some that I've listened to this week as well. Some very golden mouth, eloquent speaking men. I wish I was one of them. But some of you are very well spoken, and I love listening to you speak and to you teach. I could do it all day, every day. But he was banished from Constantinople on June 10 of 404 against the wishes of Pope Innocent I, and died in exile September 14, 407. He was venerated after his death, now highly regarded as a saint. Another one of those teachings I don't understand. I thought the Bible teaches that Christians are saints. But he was elevated to a saint by many, and the Eastern Orthodox Church recognizes him as one of the holy hierarchs. Okay, Arsacius of Tarsus, 404-405, was a brother of Nectarius and has served as archpriest under John the First. But he harbored his hostility toward his predecessor, and he even testified it against him at the Synod of the Oak, at which John was condemned. Atticus had been an opponent of John I, and in fact is credited by Palladius of Galatia as the organizer of John's expulsion, but became a supporter after his death. Isn't that convenient? He worked to raise the influence and authority of the See of Constantinople and was a champion combating heresy such as the Pelagians. Okay, when I use the phrase combating heresy, when it comes to this study, oftentimes the combating heresy, the heresy was actually the right thing or close to it. The heresy considered by the Eastern Orthodox Church is things that the Bible actually teaches. Not always, but often, and this is the case. I know it's the same thing with the Roman Catholic Church as well. So what were the heresies, or that heresy of Pelagius? He actually denied original sin. He taught that free will, moral agency is a human thing that God created in us. And his followers actually even taught that infant baptism is wrong. What heresy? I'm joking for you folks who aren't hearing the laughter here. Sisinnius I was well known for his virtue and his charity. which was rare among these men, but he only served a little less than 2 years. Nestorius was one of the most controversial patriarchs because of his belief and teaching that denied the divine nature of God, was truly united with the body of Jesus, and he taught that Mary gave birth to the human body only, and therefore she could not be called the mother of God. And do either one of those things matter as far as us going to heaven? Maximianus, 431 through 434, led a monastic life and had a reputation for sanctity for his action in building, from his own funds, and this is a good thing, tombs for the remains of, quote, holy men. I don't know how he decided they were holy or not, but at least I do give him his due there. Proclus was a friend and disciple of Chrysostom and became secretary to Atticus. It was during his time that the Trisagion prayer came into use. Look it up, not telling it to you. Flavian was described by Nicephorus as being the guardian of the sacred vessels of the great church at Constantinople, and died on August 11, 449, as a result of a vicious attack, get this, at the Second Council of Ephesus by Eutychus, another leader in the church. Man, I'm so thankful for the Lord's church. And unity, at least, among you brethren and those, most of those I know. Anatolius, 449 through 458, became patriarch through the influence of Dioscorus upon Emperor Theodosius II. He publicly condemned the heresies of Eutychus and Nestorius, and it was the Council of Chalcedon, which was called by Anatolius, that the Patriarch of Constantinople was decreed to have the same rights and powers as those of the Bishop of Rome. And boy, don't you know that went over really well in Rome. Because they were supposed to be the head of everything, right? The universal church. It's clearly showed that no man at that time was recognized by the other bishops and patriarchs as the universal head of the church. And that's exactly the way that it should have been and still should be. Our next section, the early Byzantine era. I'm not going to get anywhere close to here. God said, prepare more than you can preach. I did, sir. I saved the rest till next year. Gennadius, first, 458-471, was regarded as a successful administrator of his duties and is praised by all relative historians who wrote many commentaries. I will give him this. He was a very studious man. There were a few of these who were decent people. A few of them. But some of them were not at all. But he wrote many commentaries, including one on Daniel, many other parts of the Old Testament, and actually on all the epistles of Paul. So he was very much a student of the Bible. Why he didn't follow that in his office, I don't know. Acacius, 471 through 489, formerly headed an orphanage in the Church of Constantinople. He worked both to restore unity in the East and to elevate the authority of the See of Constantinople by asserting independence from Rome and influencing Alexandria and Antioch. He wanted to be equal to Rome. Why not? Neither one should have been above the other. I can agree with him there. But he was more of a statesman than a theologian. Leaders of the church, I guess, do kind of need to be both, don't they? But he was more political than he was preacher. And leaders of the church, bishops, archbishops, none of that. But elders, presbyters, shepherds, they need to be leaders, spiritual leaders of the church, not worried about the politics outside. He was excommunicated by the Pope in Rome, and the condemnation was repeated in the name of the Council of Chalcedon in 485. But the Eastern Christians still remained in communication with him, and he remained in office until his death in 489. Frevita was definitely an interesting study. I hope you'll read along this or listen. It's reported by Nicephorus Callistus to have cheated his way into office. You know, I have heard of places where there were elders in the church who more or less cheated their way into the office. In the Lord's church. So we can laugh about this because it is kind of funny, but that's not funny. We need men who truly want to do the Lord's will, truly fit the qualifications of that office, and those that truly desire it for the right reason. But listen to this. On the death of Acacius, the Emperor Zeno placed on the altar of the great church of Constantinople 2 sheets of paper. On one was written a prayer that God would send an angel to inscribe on the blank sheet the name of him whom he wished to be patriarch. A fast of 40 days of prayer was ordered. The church was given into the church was given into the custody of a confidential eunuch. the imperial chamberlain and the imperial seal set on the casket containing the papers. A presbyter named Frivita was in the charge of the suburban church of St. Thecla, fired with ambition. There it is. We heard that earlier. Fired with ambition, he paid the eunuch large sums and promised him more to write his name on that blank sheet of paper. At the end of the 40 days, the casket was opened, the name of Frivita was found, and he was enthroned amid universal acclamations. Wow, God wrote his name on this piece of paper, and people fell for it. He died after only 4 months in office. The eunuch tried to collect his reward from the executors, and the whole plan was then revealed to the emperor. But no trace exists of this story. That's funny how some things get covered up, don't they? And that's something that if I was them, I would try to cover that one up too. Euphemius famously rebuked Anastasius, the future emperor, who held some heretical views. And this I agree with him. If you must frequent the church, agree with her, or else no more enter into her gates to pervert men more simple than yourself. In other words, don't come in here stirring up trouble. That's what he was saying. If you're not going to follow the beliefs of the church, then don't come and mess with people's minds. And that's the way it should be today. If the Church of Christ is following the Bible, don't come in here trying to mess with people's minds and changing their minds on the truth. So, some of these things we see were actually really good things. Not many of them. He refused to crown Anastasius until he would give a written profession of his creed, promise under his hand to keep the Catholic faith intact, make no innovation in the church, and follow as his rule belief the decrees of Chalcedon. See, that changed from the good thing to the not so good thing. Macedonius II was deposed by the other patriarchs at the behest of Anastasius after refusing to change his adherence to the Orthodox beliefs. And I'm going to drop down through some of them so I can get a little further here. Menas, in 536 to 552, became patriarch because of the influence of the Empress Theodora to the displeasure of the church or the clergy at Constantinople. He was excommunicated twice by Pope Vigilius because he disagreed with the Pope, but was restored quickly on both occasions. It was during his patriarchate that Justinian's Hagia Sophia, this is the second one, was consecrated because the first did burn during a riot in 532. Eutychius was arrested. He served twice. He was arrested and exiled on false charges by Justinian after Eutychius rebuked his adaptation of tenets of the, I tried to say this last night. Which among other things taught that Jesus could not have felt pain. Upon the death of John III, Scholasticus, his successor, and after Justinian had died, he was returned to his rightful position as patriarch in October 577 by Justin II. John IV Nicetus, and again, with a lot of these names, I'm trying my best. I'm pretty good at pronouncing them, but some of them I'm gonna mess up. He was the first to assume the title of ecumenical patriarch, and what did that do? It made him equal with the Pope, equal with the Church at Rome, equal with all the other sees, if you will, all the other important ones anyway. It caused serious tension, of course, in the relationship with the Church at Rome, because Pope Gregory interpreted as meaning that John would then be considered the universal or exclusive bishop. And the Pope couldn't have that. He was also known as the faster because of his ascetical lifestyle. Thomas the First has scant information about him. He did serve from 607 to 610. But he is remembered by the Orthodox Church as one, get this, and this is a good thing. And it can rarely be said about one of these men. He was spiritually minded toward his flock. That's exactly how a bishop ought to be remembered. Every single one who's ever served as a bishop, presbyter, elder, shepherd, you understand. That's how we should be remembered, or they should be remembered. But this is the only one out of a whole 171 that I actually saw this written about. And that just in itself shocked me. Sergius I had a very close relationship with the Byzantium Emperor Heraclius. It was he who crowned Heraclius on October of 610. He also baptized Heraclius' daughter. He authored the Ecthesis together with Heraclius. It promoted the idea that Jesus possessed two natures, but only one will. I'm trying to stay out of all these disagreements that were covered in some of the councils or will be covered. But this was known as monothelitism, or the doctrine of the single will. It was accepted for 2 years until it was then condemned by Pope John IV in 640. Pyrrhus I, 638 to 641, was a supporter of monothelitism, was elected to the patriarchal throne with the support of Heraclius. He was exiled in 641 by the Byzantine general Valentinus. While in exile, he debated Maximus the Confessor and later rejected monothelitism. Listen why. After his return to the Patriarchate in Constantinople, he again was said to have reversed his thoughts. He restudied it on the doctrine, although it appears that his first recant was done only for political purposes. I don't know about you, but many times in my life I've heard folks accepting things that they otherwise wouldn't accept it because it allowed them to get further in life. And that was definitely the case with this man and many others. Let's not be that way. Let me skip down a little bit here. Okay. Germanus, 715 to 730, was a champion of diotheletism, which means that Christ had two wills. He was better or worse, remember, for being an iconodule. An iconodule was one, Gotten had asked us to use a glossary, give a glossary for words, but I didn't see it in the book. An iconodule is one who supports or vindicates icons or images, one who stands for that. An iconoclast is one who goes against that, wants to destroy them, wants to have no part with them. Of course, which was considered heretical by the end of all this? It was, of course, the iconoclast. Those who didn't want anything to do with them, they were the heretics. What does the Bible say? No images? Right. But he was an iconodule, which brought him to disagreement with Emperor Leo III, the Isaurian, who banned the veneration or the upholding of images. He either resigned or was deposed soon after this ban. Anastasius, 730 to 754, was appointed by Leo III, most likely because of his support for iconoclasm. So you have one to the other of the emperors, and then the bishops or the patriarchs who would either be iconodules or iconoclasts until that was finally weeded out later on. He later changed his mind and favored icons, only to change his mind again, both times for self-preservation. He quickly changed sides to support Artabasdos, who had seized the Byzantine throne away from Constantine, or after Constantine V had been called away to command his armies. When Constantine returned, reclaimed his throne, he defeated and executed Artabasdos. Anastasius was then deposed, whipped, blinded, and paraded shamefully through the streets of Constantinople. He then changed his mind again, back to his original view of icons, which was pardoned by Constantine, and then he was restored as patriarch. Constantine II was an iconoclast, again, which means that he did not stand for the upholding of images. He wanted to do away with them. He was deposed and jailed of June 765 after the discovery of a plot against Constantine V, along with other iconoclasts, and in the autumn of 766 was scourged and paraded through the hippodrome of Constantinople before being beheaded. Maybe he should have changed his mind. No, he actually stood before what was right. Paul IV, 780 to 784, was first opposed to the veneration of icons until after the death of Leo IV, when he desired to restore it, but realized he didn't have the power to do so. You hate to laugh. You really do, because it's a serious situation and so many hundreds of millions of people follow this. But it's laughable when you look at the, quote, facts that are in the history of this. Again, simple Christianity, such a wonderful thing. Tarasius, 784 to 806, was another who opposed icons and later repented according to the history of the Orthodox Church. He resisted the promotion to patriarch for some time out of a sense of humility. You got to give him that. But relented on the condition that church unity be restored. with the Roman and Oriental patriarchs. I'm going to move down a little quicker, going down to the next section, which is the late Byzantine era, which is 843 through the pre-Nicene exile. How long do I have? About 5 minutes? Yeah, sure, I can get through that. Methodius the First, 843 to 847. He was elected in John the Seventh's place and called for the aforementioned synod, and I'll back up to that real quick. It was a synod that had John Grammaticus in 837, 843. He was a painter of icons at one time, but by 814 had become an affirmed iconoclast. He was for him, then he was against him. Sounds like some politicians we've had in this country. But he became an iconoclast in the administration of Leo V, who, as previously mentioned, was also of that belief. He was appointed by patriarch, but Theophilus, whom he had been responsible for educating during the reign of Michael II, father of Theophilus. After the death of Theophilus, his widow Theodora, an iconodule, deposed John. His deposal occurred at the Synod of 843, and that's where we begin this story. Methodius was elected in John's place to confirm John's deposal, and which the Synod was called, and also for his own succession to the throne. He made a triumphant procession from the church of Blacherny to Constantinople to restore the icons to Hagia Sophia. This is remembered as a holy day for the Orthodox Church. The Triumph of Orthodoxy is what it is called. And he compiled the Synodicon of Orthodoxy, which is read the first Sunday of the Great Lent, still today. So this man is very much remembered in today's Eastern Orthodox Church. He reportedly tried to be moderate toward the members of the clergy who were former iconoclast, but this was not accepted by the extremists. What this all means is by this time, 847, iconoclasm, which was the hatred really of icons and symbols, it was dead. So from that point on in the Eastern Orthodox Church, symbols and icons are still in use today. Down to Antony Callias, 893 to 901, helped to reconcile supporters of Ignatius and Photius who were actually pursuing the same policies. He supported Leo when he replaced Photius with Stephanus, with Leo rewarding him with the patriarchate when Stephanus died. Stephanus II of Amasea was appointed as a stopgap patriarch. This is an interesting story. By Emperor Romanus I Lecapenus until the emperor's son Theophylactus reached an appropriate age to assume the post. Pay attention here for a moment if you haven't been. It was called a deliberate entity by Stephen Runciman. He died on July the 18th of 928, sooner than Romanus could have possibly expected, for Theophylactus was still too young. Okay, he served 2 years. Theophylactus was still too young. How old was the kid? Keep paying attention. Tryphon, 928 to 931, was raised to the patriarchate upon the death of Stephanus II under the condition that he would resign when Theophylactus came of age. When the boy turned 16 in 931, Romanos asked Tryphon to step down, but he refused to hand over the throne to such an inexperienced youth. Yeah, I don't blame him. He resigned without intention to do so by being tricked into signing a blank piece of paper over which his forced indignant resignation was written by Bishop Theophilus of Caesarea and Emperor Romanos, and he died as a simple monk in 933. I'm just going to go on to my conclusion here. You've got all these other notes because I know that I'm going to get pulled out of here pretty quickly. There are many fascinating accounts throughout the history of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. Some of them you've heard, a lot of them you still haven't. Some of them were violent, some of them were simply disturbing, and others make very good storylines for soap operas if you ever want to write it. It really, the sad condition of the human being at some points in history, and it's no different today, but you could definitely see it in this study. Frankly, there's little to be seen in the Patriarchs of Constantinople of men who had God's will even slightly at the forefront of their minds. Only a couple of examples of men who were actually pretty good men. The rest of them didn't seem to be. Surely, there were some of those who were good and possibly great character, but things that really moved me as I did research for all this, and 178 men total. There are 178. If you look at the outline, you'll see that. Out of those 178 men that I researched and all the related information to go with them, the scriptures were almost never mentioned. And even if they were, it was in the context of a philosophical argument that had zero importance. And that's telling in itself, isn't it? When you study the history of a church and the scriptures are never used. Sadly, an estimated 300 million are adherents to the Eastern Orthodox Church today. It has a founding story that is completely fabricated. Isn't that sad? You know, we laugh about it, but it's not laughable. It's something we need to pray about. And we need to consider that there are so many people that fall for such things and such foolishness that we need to pray for them. And we need to try to study with them. We need to try to win them to Christ and try to show them the truth about simple Christianity. It's no wonder that Asia Minor was so easily taken by the Muslims with all the lack of scriptural unity that took place at that time and how far they'd gotten away from Scripture. I thank you for your attention. Thank you for allowing me to do this. God.